The public knew him as the man who never seemed to age, never seemed to spend money, and never missed the perfect punchline. For more than 4 decades, Jack Benny built one of the most successful careers in entertainment history by playing a character who was equal parts lovable, stubborn, vain, and hilariously cheap. Whether audiences heard him on the radio, watched him on television, or saw him perform live, they felt like they knew exactly who Jack Benny was. He was the eternal 39-year-old, the man who would argue over a penny, the violin player who proudly displayed more confidence than talent. To millions of fans, the character felt so authentic that the line between fiction and reality eventually disappeared altogether. But there was one major problem with that image. Almost everything people thought they knew about Jack Benny was carefully crafted entertainment. The real man behind the jokes was remarkably different from the character that made him famous. Away from the cameras and microphones, Benny was known for generosity, loyalty, kindness, and a quiet sense of compassion that rarely made headlines. In many ways, he spent his entire career hiding his true personality behind one of the greatest comic creations in broadcasting history. And the story of how he pulled off that illusion for over 40 years is every bit as fascinating as the man himself. Long before he became Jack Benny, he was Benjamin Kubilski, born on February 14, 1894, in Chicago and raised in nearby Waukegan, Illinois. His parents were Jewish immigrants who believed strongly in education and hard work. Like many families of the time, they hoped their son would pursue a respectable profession and build a stable future. But young Benjamin quickly discovered a passion that would shape the rest of his life. When he received a violin as a child, he became fascinated with music. His parents encouraged the interest, arranging formal lessons and eventually sending him to study in Chicago. By all accounts, Benny showed genuine promise as a musician. Teachers recognized his natural ability, and there were moments when a professional music career seemed entirely possible. There was only one problem. He hated practicing. Like many talented children, Benny loved performing far more than preparing. While he enjoyed entertaining people, he lacked the discipline necessary to become a world-class violinist. Eventually, school lost its appeal as well. He left formal education early and began performing wherever opportunities appeared. At first, music remained the center of everything. He played in local theaters, small productions, and vaudeville circuits. Yet something unexpected happened along the way. People laughed, not at the music itself, but at him. Benny possessed an effortless ability to make audiences smile even when things went wrong. If a performance stumbled, he could improvise. If a joke failed, he could recover. He had an instinctive understanding of timing that couldn't be taught. One famous turning point reportedly occurred during his military service in World War I. While entertaining fellow sailors with his violin, the performance failed to impress the crowd. Instead of panicking, Benny responded with humorous remarks and self-deprecating comments. The audience laughed harder at the jokes than they had listened to the music. At that moment, he discovered something important. Comedy might be his true gift. Over the next decade, Benny gradually transformed himself from a musician who occasionally joked into a comedian who occasionally played violin. The instrument remained part of his act, but increasingly as a prop rather than a serious artistic pursuit. By the early 1930s, radio was emerging as America's most powerful entertainment medium. Benny initially approached it cautiously. Many stage performers considered radio risky because success depended entirely on personality and voice rather than visual performance. Fortunately for Benny, his greatest strength wasn't physical comedy. It was timing. His first radio appearances immediately revealed a style unlike anything audiences had heard before. Instead of delivering rapid-fire jokes, Benny mastered pauses. He understood that silence could be funnier than words if used correctly. His famous opening line perfectly demonstrated that philosophy. "This is Jack Benny talking. There will be a slight pause while you say, 'Who cares?'" The pause that followed became just as important as the joke itself. Listeners loved it. Soon, Jack Benny became one of the biggest stars in America. What made his success truly remarkable was the character he created. Rather than portraying a heroic version of himself, Benny built an entire comedy empire around his own flaws, or at least fictional flaws. His radio character was cheap, painfully cheap. The jokes became legendary. He argued over tiny amounts of money. He drove an ancient Maxwell automobile that barely functioned. He treated every purchase as if it might bankrupt him. The audience couldn't get enough. Week after week, listeners tuned in to hear Benny find new ways to avoid spending money. The jokes evolved into running gags that lasted years, sometimes decades. One of the most famous involved a fictional robber demanding your money or your life. After a long pause, Benny replied, "I'm thinking." The joke became part of American comedy history. But while audiences laughed at the character's stinginess, the real Jack Benny was quietly behaving very differently. Friends consistently described him as one of the most generous people they had ever known. Unlike many celebrities who publicly advertised charitable donations, Benny preferred helping people privately. He gave money to causes he believed in, assisted struggling performers, and frequently offered support without expecting recognition. Many of these acts remained unknown until years later because Benny specifically avoided publicity. This contrast between public image and private reality became one of the defining features of his life. The cheapskate was actually generous. The vain celebrity was surprisingly humble. The selfish character was often remarkably thoughtful. Perhaps nowhere was this difference more visible than in his family life. In 1927, Benny married Sadie Marks, who audiences would eventually know as Mary Livingston. Together, they became one of entertainment's most beloved couples. Mary was funny, intelligent, and possessed excellent comic instincts. She became a regular part of Benny's radio programs and developed her own fan following. Yet few listeners knew she struggled with severe stage fright. Over time, the anxiety became overwhelming. For many performers, such a problem could have ended a career. Instead, Benny quietly adapted. Rather than forcing Mary into uncomfortable situations, he worked around her needs. Scripts were adjusted. Recordings were modified. Accommodations were made. Most importantly, he never turned her struggles into publicity. At a time when many stars carefully protected their own careers above all else, Benny prioritized his wife's comfort and well-being. That loyalty extended throughout their marriage. His daughter Joan later described him as a devoted father and loving family man whose public image barely resembled the person they knew at home. According to Joan, the kindness audiences occasionally glimpsed was entirely genuine. In fact, she often said her father was one of the nicest people she had ever met. Another example of Benny's generosity emerged through his lifelong connection to Waukegan. Despite achieving enormous fame and wealth, he never forgot his hometown. Throughout his career, he frequently referenced Waukegan in interviews, performances, and conversations. Unlike celebrities who distanced themselves from humble beginnings, Benny seemed genuinely proud of where he came from. That affection became especially clear in 1961, when Waukegan decided to honor him by naming a school after him. Benny responded with a gesture that perfectly reflected his personality. He established trust funds for every baby born in the city on that particular day. The amount chosen was characteristically humorous. $39, his famous age. While the financial impact of the gift was modest, the symbolism mattered far more. Benny wanted to celebrate his connection to the community that helped shape him. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture he often made away from public attention. As the years passed, Benny successfully transitioned from radio to television, a challenge many performers failed to accomplish.